So, I was supposed to have a video out at the start of August, but it got a copyright strike. So let's go on another unscripted Ace Attorney rant. What if Ace Attorney had a Mario Party clone? This is a random topic that me and a few friends ended up really hashing out in between some of Esper's Ace Attorney streams, which for the record, if you haven't checked those out, you should. With the release of this video, I'm going to officially publicize my playlist of all my appearances on other channels, which is mostly the Ace Attorney Esper streams that I've been on, so check that out. It's fun, link will be in the description. But anyway, after we discussed it like 1 or 2 nights, I continued to be obsessed with the idea, and now I just feel like presenting it in video form, because it'll be fun, and I need something for this month. There are 3 main things I feel like are the most fun to discuss when talking about a Mario Party clone for any franchise, not just Ace Attorney, and they are the core mechanics, the character roster, and of course, the boards. If you're looking at that list and wondering, hey, where are the mini games? I mean, I could sit down and try to come up with like 50 to 100 Ace Attorney themed mini games, but I don't think that's gonna be particularly fun. So if anything, we'll make this a group effort. If you think you have a great idea for an Ace Attorney themed Mario Party minigame, leave it in the comments, and hopefully after a certain amount of time that'll get us a decent pool to work with. So let's start with the core mechanics. I think it's easy when adapting Mario Party to not really give this a second thought and just kind of assume, you know, it'll be coins and stars with just something to replace coins and something to replace stars. And while yes, that's a winning formula to an extent, I think we could have a little bit more fun with it. First off, as far as coins are concerned, I feel like there's no reason to not just include, like, actual money. Like, I don't think Ace Attorney has ever been a stranger to admitting that there is just real money in this world, so it'd be weird to make up some other kind of, like, small currency. It would be really funny, though, if depending on what version of the game you're playing, the currency changes to reflect the region, just like the games do, for no reason. So, you know, in Japan you'll have yen, in America you'll have dollars, and it'll be like that for every version of the game. And of course, I'd still want there to be items and unique board elements that you can spend your money on, so that the small currency has some value outside of just purchasing the main winning big currency, so to speak, the equivalent of stars. But I don't want it to just be as simple as you buy stars and whoever has the most stars at the end wins. No, we can get a little more interesting with Ace Attorney. I want to treat each game of this Mario Party clone as if it is an Ace Attorney case. Treat every board like it's a crime scene, and therefore I feel like the equivalent of stars would have to be evidence. So your ultimate goal while playing the game is to get to the evidence first and spend your money to be able to use that evidence for yourself in the trial. What do I mean by the trial? Well, you know how Mario Party has bonus stars, and bonus stars never really feel fair? They're just kind of a last-minute thing, so that every player has some hope of the outcome being at least a little interesting. Well here, while I do think if you manage to collect the most evidence for yourself, you're probably still gonna have the best chance to win, I want to replace bonus stars with something very slightly more skill-based, and that would actually make that final moment interesting. We're basically gonna have a mock trial minigame in which you have to organize your evidence. This would be a very simple system of just picking the order in which you present it, kind of like how in Smash Ultimate Squad Strike you secretly like pick what order you're playing your characters. And then the 2 opponents will go at it, and whoever has built the best case, so to speak, will win out, which again, it'll usually be the person that just has more ammo to throw. But if you're clever about connecting your evidence, or you're lucky with how your evidence shuts down theirs, then it is possible for someone with less evidence to win, theoretically. This would be a very quick minigame, like less than 4 minutes. Now, this whole thing doesn't really make sense in the context of a 4-player free-for-all. I kind of expect the primary mode of this game to actually be a 2v2, where you kind of have 2 members of the defense on a team and 2 members of the prosecution on a team, and, you know, members of the same team can work together so that when you get to that final trial, it is, you know, one side versus the other, and that'll be the most fun cinematic angle. There should still be a 4-player free-for-all mode for people who want a more standard Mario Party experience. The whole end-of-game trial thing would just have to be adapted to work with such a system, and it would probably be pretty heavily compromised in that context, but it would probably still be fine. As for how a player can effectively use the evidence to try and get an advantage in that final trial sequence, my instinct is to say there's 8 or 9 pieces of evidence that are basically always going to appear on a board. You know, the stuff that you'd expect to see in any Ace Attorney case. The murder weapon, probably fingerprints, traces of blood, a broken object, a witness testimony, security camera footage, the dead body, and of course, an autopsy report. Listing those out, you could immediately see how those pieces of evidence can easily be related to each other. I actually listed them out in the pairs that I'd kind of expect to see. So basically, if you are able to, on your side, present the 2 related pieces of evidence back to back, it'll give your case a big advantage. Alternatively, what would be complementary pieces of evidence if they were both on the same side can easily be contradictory pieces of evidence if they're presented opposite to each other. And that could be a way for the side with less evidence to theoretically gain an advantage if they're able to tear down the opponent's evidence with their own. I would also think it'd be interesting if there was some very simple upgrade system, like if you spend the time or money to investigate your evidence further, you can make your case surrounding that evidence better. So, you know, in theory, you'd go from having weak evidence to medium evidence to strong evidence. I don't think it needs more than 3 tiers, and strong evidence is less likely to get torn down. That's a level of complication I'm not fully committed to wanting to include for this, but it could be fun. That's how I would try and make the mechanics of this Ace Attorney Mario Party clone a little more unique. At its core, you're still going around a board trying to get more things than the other player, but there's a little bit of spice in there to make it generally more Ace Attorney coded, and hopefully add a little more intrigue to the final moments of the game. I could see this whole thing being a little too complicated, but you know, that would require actually making the game and testing it out, and then you can kind of cut down from there based on what works and what doesn't. So, that's the core mechanics. Now the things more people would probably prefer to talk about, the characters. With how we have the game set up, I think it makes sense to basically have a symmetrical character roster featuring the same number of defense lawyers as prosecutors. This way we could have a roster that basically mirrors itself, as well as more than enough characters to fill out both sides of the theoretical 2v2 struggle that I've presented in the mechanics. So I think the simplest characters to include are the 6 most prominent prosecutors and lawyers from the 6 mainline series games. For the prosecution, that's easy. Just run through the 6 games and pick out the main prosecutor from each game. Miles Edgeworth, Franziska von Karma, Godot, Clavier Gavin, Simon Blackquill, and Nayuta Sadmati. Perfect. Easy, no problems. On the defense side, it's slightly more complicated, but still works out very well. As long as you accept that, yeah, we are going to be counting the assistants as part of the defense and letting you play as them. It's just more fun that way and makes sense with the 2v2 system. That way, you know, you can have a team of Phoenix and Maya. So with that, the defense would be Phoenix Wright, Maya Fey, Mia Fey, Apollo Justice, Athena Sykes, and Trucy Wright, the main lawyers and assistants from the 6 mainline games. And I especially love how this lines up with the prosecutors. Obviously, Phoenix is in front of Edgeworth, Mia's in front of Godot, Apollo's in front of Clavier, Athena's in front of Simon. Maya kinda gets the leftover being mirrored with Franziska, but I think that still works fine. She isn't as intrinsically connected to any of the main prosecutors as the other lawyers are. And then Trucy's left with Nayuta. I do feel a little weird not having Trucy next to Apollo on the roster, but you kinda need Apollo in front of Clavier and Athena in front of Simon, and I don't want to change the order of the prosecutors. So, okay, Trucy can be next to Athena, and in front of Nayuta, that's fine. Though there is one element of this that I actually do end up really liking, but it's also a slight spoiler. So I guess I should address how I'm going to treat spoilers in this video. What I consider to be like really minor, quick spoilers, I'm going to just say that I'm about to spoil something, probably give a 2 to 3 second countdown, quickly say it, and then move on. For any bigger spoilers, I'll let you know and probably save it for the end of the video. In this case, here's a minor Spirit of Justice spoiler. Nayuta is the prosecutor for the one case where Trucy ends up as the defendant, so I do think it kind of fits that they're in front of each other on the roster. So with that, we have a very solid roster of 12 characters from the mainline games for this Mario Party. But while we're sitting here with the concept of Ace Attorney Mario Party, we don't have to just represent the mainline games. We can take this opportunity to present a fun, obviously non-canon since Mia's here, all-encompassing celebration of the Ace Attorney franchise. And I think the easiest place to start with that is to go ahead and throw in the main cast members from the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles. Following with our defense and prosecution logic, on the defense's side we'll have Ryunosuke Naruhodo and Susato Mikotoba. And on the prosecution, we'll have Barack Van Zykes and a secret unlockable character. So, for each of the main collections of Ace Attorney games, I actually think there's a great secret unlockable character that lines up with each one. This is a character that fits the defense or prosecution role, but also is probably considered a major reveal that people who haven't played that particular set of games wouldn't know about. So keeping them secret, and we'll discuss the unlock criteria later, works out really well. So for each of the main collections, those being the Phoenix Wright Trilogy, the Apollo Justice Trilogy, the Investigations Collection, and the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles, there will be a secret character positioned on the roster as so. That leaves us with one empty slot on the defense's side, and seeing as we haven't talked about investigations much yet, I don't think it should be a surprise to anyone, really, that this spot is going to go to the main new character and new assistant introduced in that game, Kay Faraday. Now, it's a little weird to put Kay Faraday on the defense's side, since she's obviously Edgeworth's assistant in the investigations games. So shouldn't she be with the prosecution? There's a couple reasons why I don't think that fits. First of all, the entire prosecution lineup is made up of characters that are actively opposing you, and Kay's never in a position to do that, so it feels weird to put her on that side of the roster. By that same token, all the assistants are on the defense's side. Maya, Trucy, Susato. So it feels weird to not have Kay there alongside them. Thirdly, and these are very, very minor Investigations 2 spoilers, Kay's technically the assistant to a defense lawyer for most of her appearances, because through most of Investigations 2, we're working as a lawyer's assistant. That's just how that game works. So really, she spent just as much time working with a lawyer as she has a prosecutor. And fourth, and these are kind of major Investigations 1 spoilers, the whole thing with Kay Faraday is that she calls herself the Great Thief Yatagarasu. And the thing about the Yatagarasu is that it was actually made up of 3 people. A lawyer, a prosecutor, and a detective. And if you look at the main cast of Investigations 1, you have Edgeworth the prosecutor and Gumshoe the detective, leaving Kay Faraday as the defense lawyer. That one's a little cute, but I do like it. So for all those reasons, I do think Kay Faraday just fits better on the defense side. With that, we have upped this roster to 20 characters that better celebrate the entire Ace Attorney saga, almost. Sure, we put Kay Faraday in, but we're still kinda lacking Investigations representation, you know? So there are 2 characters from Investigations 2 that will fill our defense and prosecution mold, and those are Eddie Fender and Eustace Winter. And I just think that's really funny. Throughout all this, these 2 technically work for the roster, and I would kind of love to have them playable. It makes it so that the amount of Investigations reps lines up better with the Great Ace Attorney reps, and I think that's kind of perfect, so sure. why not have them? That brings the roster up to 22 playable characters, which is exactly how many are in Super Mario Party Jamboree, so I think that's kind of fair. I personally like it. This is a fun, let's imagine how this works sort of project. I'm not going to restrict myself for no reason. And obviously, since they're spoilery, we'll talk about these unlockable characters at the end. Now, looking at this, I could see people being upset that there are certain major Ace Attorney characters that are being completely snubbed just because they aren't a lawyer. The 5 big ones that come to mind are Dick Gumshoe, Emma Skye, Shilong Lang, Verity Gavel, and my boy Herlock Sholmes. These are all great fun characters with major roles in the games, some of which are mechanically equivalent to a prosecutor or an assistant. Shilong Lang and Verity Gavel are basically the acting prosecutors of the investigations games, even though they are not technically prosecutors in canon. Herlock Sholmes and Dick Gumshoe are the detectives of their respective games, but Dick Gumshoe is so beloved, and Herlock Sholmes is so prominent in his games beyond just being the standard detective role. In fact, there is another smaller detective character in the games that fits more what that role traditionally entails. That, you know, you could easily consider them main character status to the point where you could consider just putting them on the defense or prosecution team, and I wouldn't terribly argue with you. And Emma Skye started out her life as an assistant in Rise from the Ashes, and she's continued to appear consistently, just in a different role. So I could see any of these characters being slotted in over characters I've included, but personally, I think these characters will fit somewhere better. I like the way my playable character roster stands right now, but I do want to include all these guys, and I'll show you how when we talk about the boards. Here, I will fully admit to going a little crazy. I want a board representing each Ace Attorney game. That brings us to 10 boards. That's more than any Mario Party game has ever had. Mario Party 1 had 8 boards. I think one of the newer games also made it up to 8. I want to say it was Jamboree. But no Mario Party game has ever had 10 standard boards. I'm just having fun. So if we're picking a board to represent each Ace Attorney game, this becomes a process of looking at the cases within each Ace Attorney game and determining which location would be the most fun to have a board based off of. Starting with the first game, we only really have 2 options, those being Global Studios from Turnabout Samurai and Gourd Lake from Turnabout Goodbyes. Both of these locations are either consistently used throughout the Ace Attorney series or have elements that are consistently used. Personally, I'm hard-leaning Global Studios, chock it full of different Steel Samurai references. I think just a TV studio is with a bunch of sets and things is going to be way more fun to traverse than a lake, which constitutes having a large body of water in the middle of the map, and I'm not sure would be particularly fun to play around. So for the original Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney, we are putting in Global Studios. For Justice for All, I don't really want to use the Gatewater Hotel from the final case, mainly because we'll have a better use for that naming convention later. I also don't want to use Kadine Village right now, because I think we'll have better spots to use that naming convention later. Which leaves us with the Berry Big Circus. Let's be real, I think as a board, it'll be fun to have a circus setting, like there could be a lot of fun elements in there. Thanks to Investigations 2, the Berry Big Circus is a recurring element in the Ace Attorney series, so you don't have to just have Justice for All characters in here. You could also have some Investigations 2 characters in here, and it'd be fun. For Trials and Tribulations, I think the only real option is the Hazakura Temple from the final case, Bridge to the Turnabout. And obviously, you include the smaller temple, the bigger temple, and the whole long bridge. I think that'll be super fun and cool for a board up on a snowy mountaintop. I think that works fantastically. For Apollo Justice, it's hard to use any location other than the Sunshine Coliseum from Turnabout Serenade. The second and fourth cases are bouncing around so many different locations that it's hard to really consolidate that into a board concept. So let's do Sunshine Coliseum We can make it a lot more active by obviously having it set up for the rock concert, having a performance going on. Maybe that's part of the board element, is the members of the Governor is doing a set in the middle and changing things by doing that. It'll be a solid board. For Dual Destinies, we actually have kind of a wealth of options. Pretty much every Dual Destinies case presents us with an interesting location that I would not mind seeing as a board. Monstrous Turnabout gives us Ninetales Vale. Turnabout Academy gives us the Themis Legal Academy. Cosmic Turnabout and Turnabout for Tomorrow gives us the Cosmos Space Center. And Turnabout Reclaimed, my fave, gives us the Shipshape Aquarium. As much as I love the Shipshape Aquarium, I do think we should rule out locations from DLC cases, just because it's less likely people will know what they are. Which leaves us with the other 3 locations. I do feel like Ninetales Vale isn't quite up to snuff with the other 2. It's a fun little yokai village, but it doesn't stand out in my mind the way the other 2 locations do. Themis Legal Academy is interesting for, at the very least, getting some of that courtroom aesthetic into a board, but I do think there's going to be a better place for that later. So I will opt here for the Cosmos Space Center, which has easily the most unique theming of the 3 when looking at the series as a whole. We never really get any kind of space-themed location in any other game, as well as it's just the climactic location of the game, so I do think it's very fitting in that way. And then, of course, for Spirit of Justice, there's only one real answer, and it's the Kingdom of Kadain. This is the reason why we couldn't really use Kadain Village earlier. The kingdom, as seen throughout the 1st, 3rd, and 5th cases of the game, is a character in and of itself. It is the central identity of this game, is this location existing, and there's plenty of ways to build a board around it. In fact, I'd imagine it'd be kind of a huge board, and I just think that is fun. For the Investigations board, for Investigations 1, and the main reason I didn't want to use the Gatewater Hotel, I want to have Gatewater Land from the 3rd case. There are a couple other options. I wouldn't mind using the plane from Turnabout Airlines. I would mind using either of the relatively bland office buildings from the last 2 cases. Gatewater Land, it's goofy, it's fun, it has a variety of interesting set pieces, including the western section and the haunted house section. It's got a lot of Blue Badger iconography, which I think will be really fun to play with and have a board that's really leaning into all of that, since the Blue Badger is such a consistent element of this series. So I just think it's the perfect fit. Now, the Investigations 2 board is a little tricky. For starters, we could rule out the prison from the Captive Turnabout. It just doesn't have the same level of intrigue as the other potential locations, which are, of course, the Zodiac Hall from Turnabout Legacy, or the big building from the last 2 cases of the game. And I'm really stuck between these 2, because I do think Zodiac Hall is probably more visually interesting, but the big building is so much more important to this game in particular, and the Council of Prosecutorial Excellence is housed here. You get a bit of that courtroom aesthetic as part of a board through that room. And on top of that, you get like the set of the monster movie and the pretty roof garden. And it'd be interesting to have a more like vertically oriented board. So I do lean towards big building, but I do not blame anyone for siding with Zodiac Hall instead, especially if we could have some sort of bouncing between past and present mechanics so that you could have a lot of the big like confectionery stuff from the past as well as the more spacey Zodiac stuff from the present. That could be cool. I just don't really know how you'd build that, and I'm a little more confident in big building as a board concept. That brings us to the Great Ace Attorney boards. There is a bit of a challenge here because both of the Great Ace Attorney games take place so consistently in the grander London area that it's hard to like isolate 2 different locations for 2 different boards. But I do think I found a solution. But to explain it, we're going to talk about the Great Ace Attorney 2 board first. For Great Ace Attorney 2, I want the board to be based on London's Great Exhibition from the 3rd case of that game, The Return of the Great Departed Soul. This is, for all intents and purposes, our London board. We're setting it specifically during this case to ground it more in a specific event of Great Ace Attorney 2, and also just to add a few more interesting elements to this, because of all of the science experiments and such existing in the Great Exhibition. But while that all will be there, the board will also encompass the Old Bailey, Baker Street, that one area that those Clouded Kokoro cases take place in, which I honestly find very annoying. This, for all intents and purposes, is our grander London board. We're just setting it at a time and place that can make a London board much more interesting. And much like the Kingdom of Crudine, I expect this to be a pretty big board, because why not? Now for Great Ace Attorney 1, since we already have our London board, I want something that'll give us a chance to explore the Japanese side of things. But we don't spend time in Japan. We don't really have a sense of any location there. But a big thing about Great Ace Attorney is travel between the two locations, and thus, boats. I want the Great Ace Attorney 1 board to be the SS Buria from the second case of that game, the adventure of the unbreakable speckled band. Obviously, we'd have to expand it beyond just the 2 or so rooms we see in that case, but there are so many cutscenes of characters leaving and returning to London on these boats that I imagine a lot of the board is set like just on the outside of the boat exploring it. And this way, you know, we could include both the handful of Japanese characters that would be fun to include, as well as still some characters from the London side, because it's a boat. It will reasonably be carrying characters from both sides of the cast. And this way, the stage has no overlap with our London stage. It's unique, distinct, specific to Great Ace Attorney 1. I think it works fantastically. So that would be my lineup of 10 stages. But one other element I want to talk about, you know how in Mario Party, at least in like Mario Party 8, there were those spaces that could either be DK or Bowser, depending on who landed on them last? I want us to have an equivalent of that in our game, except instead of Donkey Kong and Bowser, it's gonna be detectives and judges. This is how we're gonna implement those characters that were kind of snubbed from the playable character roster. If you encounter a detective on the board, they'll help you out in some way. Upgrade your evidence, trade you evidence that's a little bit more compatible with the rest of the evidence you have, so it'll help you out in the end, something along those lines. But when you encounter a judge, they will downgrade your evidence, claim that some evidence is faulty in some way, and basically disqualify it. Things like that. The exact detective or judge you encounter is going to be specific to what board you're on. So, for all of the Phoenix Wright trilogy cases, your detective will be Dick Gumshoe, and your judge will be the standard American judge, except for the Trials and Tribulations stage, Hazakura Temple. Let's make that the Canadian judge, because why not? Then for Sunshine Coliseum, obviously we'll have the American judge again, and this time the detective will be Emma Skye. For Cosmos Space Center, American judge, but the detective will be Bobby Fulbright. And for Kingdom of Crudine, we'll have specifically the Crudine judge, and the detective will be Emma Skye again. For the investigation stages, I want the detective for both to be Shilong Lang. He's not specifically a detective, he's an inspector, and again, throughout Investigations 1, he's basically the acting prosecutor. But really, he's not in opposition with you for most of his time on screen. He's such a bro that I totally see him in this sort of helpful detective role. And you know, inspector, detective feels adjacent and lines up well enough where we can include him as this. And obviously, for the Investigations 2 stage of Big Building, the judge is gonna be Verity Gavel. For the Investigations 1 stage, I suppose she wouldn't fit there, so we'll put the American judge there again as a reference to the fact that he testifies in Investigations 1. And then, of course, for both the Great Ace Attorney stages, we'll have Herlock Sholmes. It's actually very fortunate that we picked the SS Buria for Great Ace Attorney 1, because Sholmes totally fits on that stage as well. It's actually the place you first meet him. I want the judge on the SS Buria to be the Japanese judge, so Seishiro Jigoku. And then for the Great Ace Attorney stage, we'll of course have the British judge. So I think that's a fun way to give all 5 of those snubbed characters I mentioned before a fun major role in this game, even though they couldn't quite be playable. And that about covers it. That's how I would build out my personal Ace Attorney roster. Now, we're gonna get into spoiler territory, because I need to talk about the unlockable characters. So if you haven't played all the games, especially like Apollo Justice Trilogy, Great Ace Attorney Chronicles, I would heavily advise you get out of here, because we're going to be talking about some pretty major spoilers from those games. So I think in order to unlock these characters, since they conveniently line up with each of the collections, I think you have to basically complete a game on each map from that collection in order to unlock the character. So for example, the unlockable character for the Phoenix Wright trilogy is going to be Manfred von Karma, the first secret prosecutor, the first true final boss. And in order to unlock him, you'd have to complete a game on Global Studios, Berry Big Circus, and Hazakura Temple. I'll explain why Manfred is in this part of the roster in a moment. So similarly, for the Apollo Justice secret character, you'd have to complete a game on Sunshine Coliseum, Cosmos Space Center, and the Kingdom of Kurain, and that will unlock the final boss of Spirit of Justice, Garan Sigatar Kurain. The Queen, baby. It also will be nice to have a second female prosecutor, because we don't have a lot of those. It's just Francisca. She will slot in right next to Nayuta, obviously, which does put her across from Kei, which is not fitting, but it's just sort of a case of mainline cast bleeding into Investigations cast, so we just kind of have to live with it. For completing both Gatewater Land and the Big Building, you unlock the only unlockable defense lawyer, Gregory Edgeworth, and this is why Manfred's down here. It puts him across from Gregory. It's grouping Manfred in with the Investigations cast, because if we grouped him in with the Phoenix Wright trilogy cast, it would break up our clean line of the 6 prosecutors from the mainline games. So putting him down here with the Investigations crew lets him be across from Gregory, which I think is very fitting, because obviously throughout the whole of Turnabout Legacy, they're in opposition, so I think it's really fun to have them across from each other. And finally, for completing a game on both the SS Boya and London's Great Expedition, you unlock the secret character of Great Ace Attorney that I'm not kidding. If you haven't played Great Ace Attorney, please do not hear this, but we will unlock Kazuma Asogi, which beautifully works being in front of Susato. It fits so perfectly, of course. Chef's kiss, in my opinion. And that about covers everything. Actually, wait, one last thing. Everyone should have cool costumes. Here's a list of all the costumes that they should have, all based on different outfits and things that they have worn at some point in the games. Thank you for sticking around through this heavily planned but still unscripted little thing. Again, this is sort of a backup video because the video I intended to get out at the start of August got a copyright strike. I'm sure that video will come to light eventually, it's just gonna take a while. And you know, these are both sort of intended to be small projects, while in the background I'm working on a really big project. Maybe you can guess what it is, because I sort of promised that I'd have it done by the end of the year. Thank you for watching, like, comment, subscribe if you're so inclined, and I hope, if you watch this, you have played Ace Attorney. Goodbye.